On an otherwise quiet afternoon in a suburban neighborhood, the buzz of a police cruiser broke the calm. Officer Daniel Travers, a 10-year veteran of the local police department, was doing his usual patrol. Known for his assertive style and a reputation for enforcing the law without much concern for nuance, he pulled onto a street that had recently generated several anonymous complaints about suspicious activity. His cruiser crawled along, eyes scanning for anything that might look out of place. A black Dodge Charger parked slightly crooked at the curb immediately caught his attention. Inside the car, Agent Marcus Doyle sat in plain clothes, reading a document on a tablet and periodically glancing up at a house across the street. He had been surveilling a suspected drug trafficker for the past week as part of a federal investigation. His identity and purpose in the neighborhood were strictly classified. The FBI had coordinated with local agencies in a general sense, but specifics about this operation were deliberately withheld to prevent leaks. This was standard for sensitive investigations. Unfortunately, that left him alone and exposed to exactly the kind of situation that was about to unfold. Travers didn't recognize Doyle or the car, and as far as he was concerned, the Charger fit the profile of what he called a watch and bolt setup, vehicles used by lookouts or dealers. Without notifying dispatch, he pulled up behind the vehicle, parking at an angle that boxed it in. He stepped out slowly, resting his hand near his service weapon, his body language already signaling confrontation. Inside the Charger, Doyle noticed the patrol car. His experience told him exactly what was about to happen. He remained calm, though slightly annoyed. He didn't want any interaction, but he knew better than to escalate. He tapped his tablet to lock the screen and reached slowly into the glove compartment for his credentials, just in case. Outside, Travers was already approaching the driver's side window, his posture rigid, his jaw set. "Roll down the window," Travers demanded, his voice sharp. Doyle complied, lowering the window halfway. "Afternoon, officer," he said, trying to keep his tone even. "What are you doing here?" Travers asked, his eyes scanning the inside of the vehicle, noting the lack of visible weapons or contraband, but also not seeing anything that marked Doyle as law enforcement. "I'm just sitting here, reading," Doyle replied, nonchalant. "Sitting here reading? In this neighborhood? For what, 2 hours now?" Travers narrowed his eyes. "Got some ID?" Doyle gave a measured nod. "I do, yes. But before I hand it over, I'd like to know if I'm being detained." That question immediately triggered something in Travers. He bristled. "You answer the questions. I don't need a lecture on the law." "I'm not giving you a lecture, officer. I just want to be clear on my rights," Doyle replied evenly, not rising to the challenge. Travers leaned closer to the window. "You think you're clever. You think quoting some YouTube lawyer's gonna get you out of this. Step out of the car." Doyle remained still. "I'd advise against that." That did it. Travers reached for the door handle, pulling it open. "Out. Now." With a slow exhale, Doyle complied, stepping out of the vehicle. He kept his hands where they could be seen, making no sudden movements. His demeanor was calm, but there was a distinct steeliness in his gaze. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. Travers didn't respond. He was already patting Doyle down, brusquely and without explanation. He pulled Doyle's wallet from his back pocket and opened it. The moment his eyes landed on the gold badge tucked behind the ID flap, his entire demeanor shifted. His fingers paused, and he squinted to read the identification. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Marcus Doyle. There was a pause, heavy and uncomfortable. Travers took a step back. "You serious?" he asked, suddenly unsure. "Dead serious," Doyle said, taking the badge and ID back. "Now, would you like to start over, or do we escalate this to your department's internal affairs and my field office?" Travers swallowed hard. His hand dropped from his belt. "Why didn't you say you were FBI?" "Because I wasn't obligated to," Doyle replied. "And I wasn't doing anything illegal. You approached me based on an assumption. You escalated without probable cause. I asked you a direct question about my detention status, and you chose to ignore it. That's not how this works." Travers glanced at the house across the street, the same one Doyle had been watching. His voice dropped. You doing a case here? Doyle didn't answer that. Not your concern. What is your concern is that you just compromised a federal surveillance operation by pulling me out of the vehicle and drawing attention. Travers looked visibly uncomfortable now. His shoulders stiffened as he realized the gravity of the situation. I didn't know, he said, more defensively than apologetically. You didn't ask, Doyle shot back. You made assumptions. You were aggressive without justification. You boxed in my vehicle, forced me out, and conducted an unlawful search. You didn't even call it in. That's not just reckless, it's dangerous. Travers tried to recover some ground. You've gotta understand, we've had complaints. Suspicious cars, people watching houses. I thought I was watching a house, Doyle cut him off. Because I'm a federal agent, conducting a sanctioned investigation. If you had simply run the plate or notified your supervisor, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Travers's eyes darted around, looking for anyone who might be witnessing the exchange. There was no one, yet. But embarrassment was creeping in. He tried to pivot. Look, I'm just doing my job. And I'm doing mine, Doyle said, finally relaxing just a bit. But your job doesn't include violating civil rights or interfering with federal jurisdiction. The silence that followed was thick. Travers rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to say. Doyle took a slow step toward the Charger, opening the door again. Unless you have further business with me, officer, I'd like to get back to work. Travers hesitated. I'll radio this in. Let them know not to bother you again. That would be wise. As Doyle sat back in his car, Travers returned to his cruiser, his gait a little less confident than when he'd exited it. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and the lesson hung heavy in the air. Sometimes, authority wasn't just about the badge you wore, it was about how you wielded it. And today, Officer Travers had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving, and acting on ego rather than evidence could cost far more than a bruised ego. Sure. Here's an expanded version of Part 2 in approximately 1,000 words, continuing the dramatic scenario implied by the title. Cop harasses undercover FBI agent, instantly gets schooled. The officer's tone had shifted from casual arrogance to assertive hostility as he demanded the man step out of the vehicle. The man, dressed in civilian clothes with an air of practiced calm, hesitated only for a moment before complying. He moved deliberately, his hands visible at all times, betraying a level of composure that seemed to unsettle the officer rather than reassure him. Put your hands on the hood, the officer barked, motioning sharply with his hand. The man followed the order without protest, but the steel in his gaze never wavered. As the officer began a pat-down, he paused when his hand brushed a leather wallet tucked inside the man's waistband. What's this? The cop asked with a tone that was more accusation than inquiry. It's my ID, the man said coolly. Go ahead. Take a look. The officer snatched the wallet open, expecting a fake ID or at least something to justify his aggressive approach. But what he saw inside stopped him cold. A gold badge. Federal issue. FBI. With credentials to match. A flicker of panic flashed across the officer's face. He blinked twice, then looked up at the man. This real? He asked, already knowing the answer. The man slowly turned to face him, his posture shifting now, no longer just a compliant civilian, but someone who clearly outranked the officer in both authority and experience. Yes, he said, locking eyes with the officer. Very real. And you've just made a very real mistake. The cop stepped back, suddenly unsure of himself. The arrogance drained from his face like color from a pale sky. I didn't know, he stammered. You weren't, there was no indication you were federal. You didn't ask, the agent replied calmly. You went straight to intimidation. You escalated a routine traffic stop into harassment. And now you've got a bigger problem than you realize. The officer opened his mouth to speak, but the agent raised a hand to silence him. Do you know what happens when a local cop harasses a federal agent? The agent asked, his voice low and firm. It's not just a report. It's an investigation. It's internal affairs. It's the DOJ. And in your case, it might be a civil rights violation. You didn't just violate procedure, you trampled over it. The officer's breathing grew shallow. He looked around nervously, as if hoping another patrol car might pull up and save him from the train wreck he'd just caused. I thought you were reaching for something, he said weakly. I had to be sure. I was reaching for my registration, which you asked for, the agent said with a cutting precision that left no room for excuses. You escalated the situation when there was no threat. You let your bias and your power trip override your judgment. The agent's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and swiped to answer. This is Agent Ramirez, he said. Yes. Traffic stop. Local officer. I need someone from the field office here ASAP. No, not injured. But we've got a situation that needs to be documented. Bring a liaison. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his coat. The officer looked like he'd just been handed a sentence. You called this in? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You left me no choice, Ramirez replied. But let me give you a reality check. I'm not here to ruin your life. I'm not here to make a public spectacle out of you. But you need to understand something, this isn't just about me. This is about every civilian you've ever pulled over. If you treat someone with a badge like this, how do you treat people without one? The officer looked down, his posture shrinking under the weight of the truth. Ramirez softened, not out of mercy, but from a deeper understanding of what power unchecked can do. This could have gone differently. You could have approached with professionalism. You could have asked questions instead of making assumptions. Instead, you chose to intimidate. That choice has consequences. Minutes later, a black SUV rolled to a stop behind the patrol car. Two agents stepped out, followed by a woman wearing an internal affairs windbreaker. The officer's face drained completely now. The EA representative approached calmly, flipping open a tablet. Officer Craig Thompson, she asked. He nodded, barely able to form words. Please hand over your badge and your weapon. She said. This is now an official investigation. Thompson looked to Ramirez, a silent plea in his eyes, but Ramirez simply looked away. There was nothing else to say. As Thompson handed over his gear, Ramirez turned toward the agents who had arrived. Check the dashcam. I want full footage. Body cam too. If it's been tampered with, we escalate. Copy that, one of the agents replied. Ia was already taking notes, asking questions, documenting everything. Thompson stood to the side, hands shaking slightly, watching as the system he once thought he controlled turned its gaze inward. As Ramirez moved back toward his car, one of the other officers on the scene, who had arrived as backup but hung back once he saw the badge, walked over and offered a nod. Sir, I'm sorry for what happened here, he said genuinely. Ramirez nodded. Thanks. Just do better. That's all any of us can ask. He got into his car and pulled away slowly, leaving behind a scene far different than the one he had been pulled into. But the message was clear, respect is not optional. Neither is accountability. And for Officer Thompson, the lesson had come hard, fast, and in front of federal eyes.